Okay, good morning everybody and a very warm welcome to the Inspectorate's launch event of our Serious Further Offences multi-agency learning panels. It's great to see so many people attending. We hope that you find this event really informative but also really useful. We're really looking forward to hearing from you as part of the launch event as well. Just so that you know, we're going to make a start. We've got an hour and a half for the session. We may not need all the time, but it's just to make sure that we've got enough time to deliver the material and sufficient time towards the end to take some questions and any comments and reflections as well. Let me start with a introduction first. It's usually good to know who's on the call itself. So my name is Simi O'Neill. I'm the head of the Probation Inspection Programme and also the Serious Further Offences Quality Assurance team. Let me hand over to the team. So Lizzie, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Morning everybody, I'm Lizzie Wright. I'm one of the inspectors in the Serious Further Offence team in HMI Probation. Nice to see you all this morning.
Thank you, Lizzie. And Lindsey?
Good morning everybody, my name is Lindsey Whitham and I'm also a Serious Further Offences inspector with HMI Probation.
Perfect. Thank you, Lindsey. And Hannah?
Good morning everyone, I'm Hannah Williams and also an inspector for Serious Further Offence reviews within the Inspectorate. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Okay, so just a few logistical things. The event will be recorded today. That's really to allow us to publish the material on our website, but also to share our material as we are continuing to develop the multi-agency learning panels. We will share a copy of the slides with you as well, so they will go around after the event. During the event, can we please ask you to keep your mics on mute? And just to able to allow us to handle the IT, we might ask you to keep cameras off during the presentation, but please do put your cameras on when you're asking questions or engaging in the post delivery section of it as well. The chat function you can use as well, so please do post any comments, reflections, questions in that we will pick up towards the end of the session. If there's any questions that we were unable to answer, we will make sure that we provide a response separately as well. Now, I really hope that everybody enjoys the event. We're really looking forward to hearing from you at the end as well. And I'll hand over to Lindsey, who will take us through the first part of the presentation. Thank you, Lindsey.
Thanks, Simi. Okay, so good morning, everybody. We have quite a large and broad audience this morning. So what we want to do is start with an overview of who we are, the SFO process and our role within the process for Serious Further Offence reviews. So His Majesty's Inspectorate of Probation is the independent inspector of probation and youth justice services in England and Wales. And our vision is to see high quality adult probation and youth justice services that change people's lives for the better. So we set the independent standards that shine a light on the quality and impact of those services. Our inspections, reviews, research and our effective practice products provide authoritative and evidence-based judgments and guidance. We use our voice to drive system change with a focus on inclusion and diversity, and we believe that our scrutiny leads to improved outcomes for individuals and communities. So in terms of the start of this process, obviously it's about establishing what a serious further offence is. So they are specific violent and sexual offences committed by people who are or were very recently under probation supervision at the time that they go on to commit that serious further offence. They are committed by a small proportion of the probation caseload, so it's approximately 0.5%. But despite that being a very small number, obviously the harmful nature of the serious further offences means that the impact and the consequences on victims and families can't be underestimated. So the actual process starts when a person on probation is charged and first appears in court for one of those qualifying serious sexual or violent offences, which has been alleged to have been committed either whilst they're still under current probation supervision or within the 28 working days of that recent period terminating. The SFO review is then commissioned. It serves two purposes. So one is that it acts as an internal management report, and the other is that it's also a document that can be shared with the victim or their family should they request it. Therefore, it needs to provide a robust and transparent analysis of practice to be used as an internal management document to identify lessons, but also it has to be written in a way which is accessible to both audiences. So for those of you who aren't aware, each probation region has an established serious further offence team that consists of reviewing managers who complete all the serious further offence reviews that are needed to be undertaken for that particular region. There is a centralised HMPPS team. All serious further offence reviews are submitted to the central team. Feedback is provided to each region on each individual serious further offence review. And as an inspectorate, we undertake 20% of that quality assurance activity. So when we are quality assuring, we are assessing against our independent standards. And what we're looking to see is that each individual serious further offence review provides a robust and transparent analysis of practice, that it provides balanced and well-informed evidence judgments about the sufficiency of the practice in that case, that it identifies relevant learning for the organisation to drive improvement to ensure similar errors don't occur in the future, and that is all done and all delivered and written in a way that is sensitive to the victims who may be reading those reports, and that it is accessible. Thanks, Simi. So we haven't always been involved in serious further offence reviews. In 2020, we undertook a serious further offence thematic review, following which the Secretary of State asked us to take on the role of quality assuring a sample of serious further offence reviews, and that commenced in April 2021. And the quality assurance work that we do is just one of 5 strands of work in terms of our role in quality assurance of serious further offence reviews overall. So we undertake serious further offence benchmarking events. That takes several forms. So we do those directly with regions. We do that with the central team for consistency across as 2 separate organisations, and we also do that internally. The multi-agency learning panels, which is obviously the reason we're here this morning. Many of you will have seen that we publish our annual report and periodic findings in relation to serious further offence work, and also that when we are commissioned to do so by the Secretary of State, we will undertake independent reviews. So the most recent examples that some of you may be familiar with would be Damien Bendel, Jordan McSweeney, and the most recent being Joshua Jacks. And I'm now going to hand over to Lizzie.
Thanks, Lindsay. So I'm going to take you through a bit more about what we mean regarding multi-agency learning panels. So as Lindsay has said, this was one of the themes to come out of our thematic inspection. And it was agreed that we'd develop this approach to consider learning more widely to come out of serious further offence reviews. So many of you will be aware, those of you who work within probation, that an SFO review, the remit of that is to look internally at the work of the probation service. And the remit doesn't then allow for learning to be set for other agencies, which of course would be their responsibility. However, we wanted to look at an approach that would allow learning to be shared following the completion of an SFO review to enable learning to be discussed with other agencies, therefore identifying actions that both can take forward to improve practice, and of course to identify effective practice where that's evident. So HM Inspectorate Probation are setting up multi-agency learning panels, which the aim of which is to promote collaborative learning through the lens of an SFO review. So the review will already have been completed and relevant learning will have been highlighted, and those reviews that we would want to take forward in this arena would be ones where there has been learning identified for other agencies as well as the probation service, and to develop that further. So partnership working is one of the recurring deficiencies in SFO reviews. And I guess most of you won't be surprised to hear that. That is a theme that we see quite often, both in SFO reviews, but also in our core inspection work. And we've recently published our independent reviews that Lindsay just mentioned, and partnership working and information sharing was a finding in some of those reviews as well. I can just have the next one, Simi, thank you. So just to look at that in a bit more detail, the independent review into the case of Jordan McSweeney, which we published in January 2023, highlighted some key themes in respect of information sharing. I'm sure many of you will be familiar with this review, but one of the findings was that information sharing between the prison and probation was found to be insufficient, and therefore that resulted in a risk assessment of Jordan McSweeney that was not based on all the available information. There was also findings in relation to intelligence and also the work with the police during that case as well. So the aim of if a multi-agency learning panel approach was to be taken regarding the findings of that case, the discussions would be about how to better access information, whether any meetings, reviews, etc. could be considered to better look at that information and how that's shared. And really it's about considering joint working in respect to formulating risk assessment and having therefore a robust risk management plan in place. So a case such as that, there would be lots of themes that are identified that could then be taken forward into that panel. And it would be the hope that other agencies would also bring forward their own learning from the management or involvement in that case to develop an action plan, which I'll come on to talk about in a moment. Thanks, Simi. Okay, so how would multi-agency learning panels work? So the aim of the inspectorate is that we anticipate arranging one panel in each of the probation regions. So we would, over the coming months, we would like to be able to hold one of these panels in every region in England and Wales. And that's going to involve, obviously, some collaboration with partnership agencies in each of those areas. And we ask that partnership agencies involved nominate a representative where their agency is involved to enable the panel to take place and for information to be shared. Thanks, Simi. So what would the process look like? So what we would aim is that a case is identified as suitable following the quality assurance process that Lindsay has just mentioned. So after the review has been submitted into HMPPS and either ourselves or HMPPS have undertaken quality assurance, at that point it would be identified as suitable to take forward into a multi-agency learning panel. However, we appreciate that in HMIP we only receive 20% of those reviews, and therefore if we haven't quality assured it in HMIP, the regions can also suggest a case if they feel it fits the criteria, but we haven't had sight of it as yet. We would then liaise with the SFO team in the region where the case has been identified and with the senior managers of the probation delivery unit, so that might be the head or indeed the head of operations, to discuss progressing the case and how feasible that is. We also appreciate there may be barriers to doing that, so we would hope to identify that it was suitable at that early point. We would then ask that the probation delivery unit head or the senior manager to provide details of partnership agencies, and we would work together on that process. Of course, the PDU head and the senior manager have more knowledge and information and contacts and relationships with partnership agencies in their region, so that will be a key part of the process to ascertain who we would need to be involved in the panels. We would then coordinate an initial introductory meeting. So we would, having got all the contact details for the partnership agencies, we would then set up a meeting to discuss basically what we're talking about today, what the process is, what we hope to get out of it, and what we are asking of all the participants in that panel. So we would administer the process, and we would be responsible for overseeing that, setting up the multi-agency learning panel and liaising further then with partners for any additional discussions and follow-up. So we are not asking the regional probation staff to undertake the greater role in this. This would be our oversight, obviously following those initial meetings to get the contact details and the relevant details of the partnership agencies involved. Okay, so to give an example of what the process would look like for the multi-agency learning panel itself. So once the partnership agency representatives have been identified and a time and date has been agreed for everybody to meet to discuss the case further, in the meantime, we would ask that the agency provide a timeline of their involvement with the case, highlighting what their knowledge is of the case and their engagement in interactions with other agencies in respect of sharing information and risk management. We would supply the format for that to ensure a consistent approach for each agency. So agencies should then highlight any key points in their chronology for further discussion, including both areas of deficiency, but of course, as I've mentioned, any effective and exceptional practice that occurred in the case, because both of which are important to identify and share further. The panel should then aim to formulate a summary of the key issues in the case following the meeting, which in turn should lead to an action plan being developed. And then we would ask that a representative from each organisation who was part of the panel should take ownership of the actions that they are assigned, and an agreed date will be set to feedback on the progress made. It's important, of course, to set a review date so that we can review any progress made and how the actions have progressed in the meantime. So when an SFO review is completed by probation regions, part of that process is for them to devise an action plan to take forward the learning, as Lindsay mentioned, that's been identified in the SFO review. So actions will have already been set by the probation service following an SFO review. And of course, some of these will be relevant for consideration by the panel and can be included in the action plan. Okay, so that's an overview of the how the MALP would work, and I'm just going to hand over to Hannah now, who's going to talk about a pilot event that we've held previously in Wales. Thank you.
Thanks, Lizzie. Hi, everyone. So as Lizzie said, this slide takes you through the findings of a pilot that was held in Wales. So this case was a domestic attempted murder, and in attendance were representatives from probation, police, domestic abuse specialist agency and psychology. And the group met and brought together their individual learning and shared that learning around the table, and that discussion enabled areas for learning to be identified, and much of that learning was at a strategic, systemic and procedural level. So this approach allowed for agencies to gain greater understanding of processes within each organisation, and enabled learning to be set. So that learning was then translated into an action plan. The feedback from the MALP identified a potential for the group, for that group in attendance to be wider, so to broaden it out just beyond those that had been in attendance, and opportunities to share and identify learning on a broader scale. There's also discussions around governance and how governance for MALPs can work, so the importance around confidentiality and setting terms of references was also set. There was also discussion on whether victim representatives could be or should be on panels, and that's obviously something we would discuss individually with areas as we're taking these forward. Thanks, Simi. Okay, so MALP and other reviews. So just to emphasise that the MALP doesn't intend to duplicate other reviews that are already in progress. So domestic homicides, I can see a question has literally just popped up as I've mentioned that. So yeah, we don't intend to duplicate other reviews. We recognise that other reviews are already in progress and they play an important role, such as domestic homicide reviews, MAPA serious case reviews, as an example. But we do want to look at cases where other areas of multi-agency work are relevant. So cases where immigration is a factor, housing, mental health, just as an example. We will refer to our findings and the actions set in the MALPs in our annual report as relevant, but we will discuss locally what information is published and how that information is shared. We'll also work with areas locally to identify how to share that learning within their own multi-agency meetings, such as their local criminal justice boards, youth justice boards or safeguarding boards as relevant. Thanks, Simi. Okay, next steps. So this is just to identify that any cases which fit the criteria that's already been set out can be identified to us. So after this meeting, if you feel you have cases that you'd like to discuss, please reach out to us. We will share our contact details. We're more than willing to have a conversation about these cases. Partner agencies can recommend a case which meets the criteria. So this doesn't have to come solely from probation. This can come from partner agencies themselves, as long as they meet the criteria, of course. And discussions will continue to take place within probation regions and wider HMPPS to continue the promotion of this work. And then we ask you to consider how best can we promote this work amongst partner agencies, and what are the barriers that may be presenting to us as we look to undertake the MALPs. And then this is just for your information. It's a link to our website, which gives you all the documents referred to in this presentation on SFO reviews, the standards, rules and guidance that we set and we quality assure reviews against. And I think that draws the presentation to a close, and it is an opportunity for a discussion. I've heard lots of noise in the chat, so I think there are quite a few questions for us to come to initially.
Great, thank you everybody. That was really useful, and hopefully else found it useful as well. Yes, let's now pick up some questions and reflections. There was a lot of activity going on that we've tried to keep up to date with. Please feel free to put your hand up if you want to ask any questions as part of the wider group as well. I'll start with some of the questions that are in the chat, and we'll see if people are putting their hands up. Do come on camera if there's anything that you want to say as well, and give a little introduction in terms of who you are and where you're from. The first question that came up, Lindsay, came up when you were going through the introduction, and it was just a question asking about the period of time in terms of the level of supervision. So the first question was, is that 28 days post termination of supervision, so the period at which the SFO is included? So are you okay to take that one?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, it is. And in terms of the wording of the actual eligibility criteria, it is supervised individuals who were under any form of supervision by the probation service, including those who have been subject to recall and released to SED, which terminated within 28 days prior to the SFO.
That's all. Thank you, Lindsay. We've also got a question asking about whether we review in prison settings, so particularly work that's undertaken under the OMIC model and probation staff that work within prisons. Lizzie, I know kind of you had involvement with HMI prisons in an independent review that we did, but this is particularly around the work of the probation staff. Are you okay to take this one?
Yeah, so I think in the undertaking of an SFO review from probation, we have seen reviews where probation staff in prisons have been included and interviewed for those reviews. But of course, the multi-agency learning panel can go further than that if necessary, and share and identify learning with other prison staff and of course with prison leads where relevant. So absolutely, it would involve prisons if, of course, there was learning related to prisons identified in the SFO review.
Thank you, Lizzie. Hannah, we've got a technical one next. I'm going to come to you for this one. This is working out our 20% of the reviews that we undertake. So the understanding is that our 20% that's quality assured by the inspectorate is taken from a national pool, not 20% across every single region. So can we just clarify how that works? So there may be some kind of regional differences in the ones that we look at.
Yeah, I think the question has been posed answers itself in a way that's exactly right. It's not 20% of every region. It is 20% of all reviews that come into the HMPPS central team, and we assigned a random sample, so we do not get 20% of every single region. It is 20% of work that comes in.
Fantastic. Thank you, Hannah. And our monitoring of that, we look at the regions, the number of reviews that we've had per region, and anywhere there's any particular gaps. So we will monitor that and notify the central team where we've got particular gaps, just to make sure that we've got an overview nationally as well. In terms of an anticipated start date, so there is a question. Anticipated start date, a team, is it fair to say now, today, after the event? So we've been doing quite a lot of work pre-COVID, and obviously then COVID happened, so there was a bit of kind of a change in priorities. So we are looking at relaunching. But yeah, Lizzie, do you want to just say anything about how soon we're well prepared or equipped to start delivering these?
Yeah, so we did have a couple of cases identified last year, and for various reasons we were unable to take those forward. And we've, as a part of that, we've learned from those processes that we looked at of how to take those forward last year. And yes, so we are at a point now where cases can start to be identified, and we are very keen to get this started with those cases that are relevant. And what we do as part of our QA process is we do identify those cases that we think would fit the criteria, and we do already have some of those identified. But of course, as we said during the presentation, if within regions there's a case that we haven't QA'd and it's been through the HMPPS QA process, but regions think it would be a relevant case to look at, by all means, please make us aware of those. And of course, any partnership agency staff colleagues who may be on the call, if there are cases, please, of course, let us know about those as well. So yes, we are ready to go with these when the relevant cases are identified.
Fantastic, thank you. And Hannah, as you started to do your section on other reviews, actually quite a few questions came in about parallel reviews as well. So we've got a couple of questions on, is there a potential conflict of MAPA serious case reviews? Are we saying that there won't be another serious review taking place? Are we saying that if there's another serious review taking place, we won't include that as part of our multi-agency learning panel?
Yeah, so I think they came in as the slide came up. As the slide said, we wouldn't want to duplicate any or complicate any work that's already in progress, but we'd be happy to have a conversation with those existing panel chairs if there's any way that we could support that learning. But no, we wouldn't want to sort of interfere with structures and systems that are already in place and opportunities for learning that are already in progress.
Fantastic. Thank you, Hannah. And a reminder, if anyone wants to come in with questions, please do feel free to put your hand up. Lindsay, we've got a question on involving others. So we're looking at cases at a PDU level, but there's a couple of questions here in terms of what about regional teams? So court leads, regional HPT, prison-based strategic leads, and other people that are involved more at the regional accountability level. Would we be looking to include them if we're looking at a case that was managed at a PDU level?
What we've said is that we would look at case on merit on each individual case and see who would need to participate in those panels. Obviously, for maximum impact, you want to involve the right people. So there's no hard and fast rules currently in terms of who we would be inviting to those panels. I think it would very much be, it would very much be case by case based.
Thank you for that, Lindsay. Lucy, lovely to see you. And I see that you've got a question or reflection.
It was just that question that I posted. So it's just, remind, just don't forget those other regional teams that do support the PDUs, the other functions, because, I think some teams, everything they do, some teams may not put everything on Indelia. So there's that activity that happens behind the scenes. So we just need to make sure if there's any learning around that as well.
Yeah, that's really reassuring, Lucy. Thank you for asking that. And hopefully you will see that through our standards, what we're keen to do is, whilst we look at individual practice in a case, we're also very interested in the wider systemic issues that might exist as well. So it's important for us to understand the context in which cases are being delivered and managed as well. It's not just about individual learning, and this is the whole purpose of the multi-agency panels that we want to look at what wider learning can we take from it, but also what wider effective practice can we take away from that as well. So yeah, a really helpful question. Thank
So
you.
would you also liaise with like the central team? So for example, I had a regional HPT in Southwest, but there's a central HPT team that may have all like the policy stuff as well. So it's important not just to think about the region and the PDUs, but the policy teams nationally.
Absolutely, yeah.
And
I can see
contracted providers,
yeah, I can see everyone nodding on that. So it's very important for us that we triangulate the findings. Otherwise, any recommendations or actions that we make in the action plan, they're not going to be entirely impactful or effective if we're not focusing it on the right level. And something for us that we really want to do is to keep asking that why question until we get right to the centre of what was it that needs to actually improve, and what is it that needs to change from the central level, if that's where it's relevant, to enable frontline practice to be effective and impactful as well.
That's good. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. And I think that takes us nicely onto a question about tangible outcomes. So thinking about tangible outcomes from the Wales materials learning panel, can you say any more? What happened to the action plan? How was it progressed? Who had oversight? So bearing in mind this was a pilot that we did a couple of years ago. Hannah, I don't know whether you or Lizzie want to take this one.
Yeah, I don't mind taking it. So so the learning that was identified within Wales, I suppose won't be a surprise to anyone, centred a lot around communication. There was also learning regarding the setting of bail and addresses not being sort of suitable or checked. And there was learning around MAPA thresholding, MARAC referrals, and safety planning for victims. So it was a broad set of learning, and that sat within the public protection team, as was at the time, which is where SFO reviews sat. So it sat very much within that department, but liaison with the local PDU then. And it was the responsibility within the probation region to drive forward those actions and that learning, but liaise with us and work with us to provide updates onto how well that progressed. So it was very collaborative, but sat sort of the technical side of it sat within the team that SFO sat within that region.
Thank you, Hannah. Got a really interesting question now, and I don't know who wants to take it, but I'm going to put it out there. So, question: are there any considerations being made in relation to using lived experience within the CJS, and also the inclusion of neurodiversity regarding both victim and offender or person on probation?
I think that is a very interesting question, and actually, sorry, I've just come in there. We have had discussions previously about whether we can widen it to include the experiences of victims and others with lived experience in this process. So that is something I think, again, we would have to consider on a case-by-case basis, really, depending on the case, depending on the point in which the case is at in the criminal justice process as well, of course. But it is a very interesting point and something we can certainly take away and consider. And on that note, I did just see a question pop up regarding whether we would need to wait for a conviction in respect of progressing these panels. And I think, again, it would depend on the case. It's the SFO review, as most people will be aware, is initiated following the alleged commission of the SFO and doesn't wait until the conviction, if there is a conviction. And therefore, it would be at that point, once the case is QA'd, that we would look to progress it. So therefore, not necessarily waiting for a conviction. And that would be when we would need to be mindful of confidentiality, terms of reference regarding what information can be shared. But what we've found previously when considering cases is if we do wait a significant period of time for conviction, the learning may be lost because personnel involved in the case may have moved on, or processes, policies may have moved on during that time. So we feel it is important we do try and start this as soon as the SFO review quality assurance process is completed. But again, of course, that will depend on the individual case and whether or not it's feasible to take it forward at that stage. So a lot of the questions regarding timeframes and who will be involved will be down to the individual case and once we've had those initial discussions. I hope that answers that second question as well.
That's helpful. Thank you, Lizzie. We've got some interesting questions or themes that are emerging in terms of the resource that's required from regions or probation units, or indeed other partners as well. And then particularly the impact. So people that have already been through an SFO review, it can be quite a anxious time. And then we're obviously kind of going through the case again, and how we kind of manage those types of experiences. Can we say a little bit about how much time we anticipate, whether practitioners that are involved in the SFO review will be involved, and line managers, reviewing managers that have been involved in the process of how do we intend to capture that? And I guess a little bit about our approach to wellbeing and how we want to make sure that this is a learning culture approach, as opposed to looking to go over any types of kind of a deficit approach, but more trying to build a strength-based approach.
That is a big question, I think, with a few parts.
I've put about 4 questions in one there.
We'll try and unpick some of that, but if I miss anything, please do say. So in terms of who would be involved, again, and I don't mean to keep repeating this, but it would depend very much on the case. But the aim, I think we've mentioned this already, is we are looking at systemic and procedural learning as opposed to individual learning in these cases. So why did things happen in a certain way? Why was information not shared? We want to very much explore that with partnership agencies, and therefore it would depend very much on the case as to who and how many people would need to be involved. In terms of the resource, as I mentioned in my part of the presentation, we would be overseeing the process and doing the organisation of it, and ensuring things were kept to time, etc. And the ask of partners and those involved in the panel would be to provide, as we said, a timeline of their involvement. And again, that would probably vary depending on how far and how much involvement that organisation had in the management of the case. But we are very aware of the impact of these processes on staff and colleagues and managers at all levels. And we would seek to get feedback on the level of involvement, and also offer support if and when people felt it was too difficult to be involved or there were other pressing priorities. So we would, of course, again discuss that as part of those pre-planning meetings. And we are very aware of the impact these processes can have. So we are keen to follow up and get feedback as we go on this. We have had a pilot, as we've said, but this is very much a new process for us, and therefore that's why we were very keen to collaborate with colleagues from the outset to discuss issues such as this and look at how we can address them to ensure that this can be something we can drive, but that it won't cause a huge impact in terms of the work that's already going on in regions and in partnership agencies. I think did I cover all of that?
You have, yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you, Lizzie. We have some questions about the duty to cooperate or statutory requirement of partner agencies to be involved in this process. So is there a statutory requirement for all agencies to engage, or is this voluntary? Thinking about third sector, for example. And is there an obligation for other agents to be involved? What is that duty or obligation, if there is one, particularly in terms of adopting the findings and learning?
This isn't a mandated process. We can't, there's no obligation as such, but we are driving this forward in the interests of promoting learning, promoting outcomes, and considering actions within those relevant organisations. So we would hope that there was some that everybody involved can see the benefits to undertaking this type of work, and as it is a continual finding in both SFO reviews and the independent reviews, as we've alluded to earlier, we feel it's a very important piece of work. And meetings we've been to previously, generally there has been a very positive response about partaking in events such as this to drive forward that learning. So whilst it's not mandated, we would hope there would be a significant take up in the learning opportunities that this would bring.
Fantastic, thank you. Lindsey, we've got something that's a more research-based question. I know that you're working on a thesis at the moment, so I wondered if I can pose this one to you. So there's a question to say this is a really interesting development. Some of the question we've covered because it's asking about how we make sure that it doesn't put more blame on the practitioner, and we've explained that we're looking at more of a wider systemic learning approach to this. But then kind of have we conducted any research in terms of any common themes across people who commit SFO offences besides that approach of kind of looking back on a case where you've got the benefit of hindsight and looking at things that were done and what could have been done differently and missed opportunities. So anything in terms of a research perspective and what we know about people who commit serious further offences.
I think there's obviously lots of external research that's been undertaken into kind of the profiling of people who go on to commit serious further offences. In our own annual reports, there are obviously findings in relation to particular risks and needs and risk levels that are relevant. And we've also got our serious further offence thematic review that was undertaken in 2020 that talks a lot about some of those sort of profiling issues in terms of who may fall in that cohort of somebody who would go on to commit a serious further offence. So I think internally less so. Much of the research really is focused more recently around the process of serious further offence reviews, how they're undertaken, how they are experienced by practitioners and operational staff frontline. And in terms of the actual kind of profiling of the people on probation themselves, that's very much external research, but it does exist.
Thank you, Lindsay. And it might be worth saying that our research team, headed by Robin Moore, are embarking upon some research of serious further offences as well, which will be really helpful should you want to have a look at that. It probably won't be published until early next year. And then we've also got our annual report that's being published later on this year as well. But I think that question does raise an interesting question for us, and maybe something that we might look into a little bit further in terms of some of the future work that we're doing. So thank you for posing that one. Question about Hannah, that we've done some work in terms of action plans and monitoring the impact or actions that are being taken. There's a question about how we intend to follow up actions from multi-agency learning panels. Also, whether we're looking at publishing or how we share those findings wider and with stakeholders as well.
Okay, yeah, so the findings will be shared within our SFO annual reports. We won't be publishing a report on the MALP in its, on the case specifically, but we will be sharing the findings within our publications. And as I mentioned, we'll be working within the locality to talk about how best to share the learning within that region or within that partnership arena. So there's opportunities to share that learning within probation wider to affect change, because obviously this case that would we be discussing will be relevant for practice on a wider basis. So how is that information and learning shared with practitioners to develop their own practice, but also then how is it shared amongst the partnership arena to affect change as well. So that would be part of the discussion in terms of how we develop the MALP within that locality. And again, I know it's been repeated now, but on a case-by-case basis as well. So what's relevant to that case?
And I think what would be really helpful is, as we're doing our annual reports, the more panel reviews that we've done, any emerging themes that are coming from those, what we'd like to do is collate those and present them in our annual report in terms of what we found as part of our themes, to make sure that that can then be shared with stakeholders and is also in the public domain. But we wouldn't look to name individual cases or anything like that. It would be very much based on our themes that we've collated and found.
Yeah.
Okay. A more probation focused question. Would quality development officers and their teams be involved in assisting with the pre-work or any action setting or any workshops to promote learning and any kind of formal input into the action plan as well?
Yeah, we'd have to have a conversation with the probation region in terms of resourcing and utilising QDOs, but there's certainly a role for them in sharing the learning from the MALPs and how that's disseminated to staff. We know they play a very important role in staff development and quality within the region. So yeah, we would absolutely be looking to see how we could utilise QDOs, but with the region's permission. Obviously it's their resource.
Thank you, Hannah. Okay, a question about coroner's court. So if there's a case that's going through coroner's court or a hearing, particularly in relation to the victim as well and the impact on the victim, how would the panel process work in terms of the timing? Would we be looking to convene the panel before that, after? Any kind of thoughts in relation to that?
I think again that would probably depend on where the case was at when it came to us for quality assurance, but absolutely we would need to factor in being mindful of any impact of findings or what we would share following the panel. It probably goes back similarly to the question regarding conviction, and at what point, and that will have to form part of the discussion about whether that case would be suitable. Again, there are probably opportunities to pause cases and return to them potentially, but again, that would very much depend on the case and those involved in the view. We will very much be guided by regions in those circumstances, as them and the partner agencies are the ones in the region who would have more knowledge of that. So again, that's a case-by-case basis decision, I would say.
Thank you. A quick question: who holds responsibility for overseeing multi-agency learning panels? So who's chairing them? Who has oversight of the action plans?
Well, I think again that would be a discussion, but we are driving this process and we would be the ones to oversee it. So therefore, we can assume that role of chairing to coordinate the activity, as we said earlier, about ensuring the information is received and that next steps are set. So that we would take on that role as leading on this from the inspectorate.
Thank you. And quite a big question now. And I'll start with trying to answer some of it, and team do come in. But is there any consideration in reviewing training, etc., on how risk of harm is assessed? Is there a possibility that the context of pattern of serious offending may be overlooked by the term of imminency? Now, in terms of a general approach to training and risk of harm, some of you might be aware of our core inspection programme, where we find a common theme of concern is that the quality of work in relation to keeping people safe and public protection has been insufficient in every probation delivery unit that we have inspected. So clearly there is a theme there in terms of the strength of work in relation to keeping people safe. This is also something very similar that we found in our independent reviews, and obviously that we pick up in our quality assurance of serious further offence reviews as well. Public protection is a key priority for the Chief Probation Officer. So we share what we find with HMPPS, and we share with other agencies as well where relevant, in order to drive improvement. Our recommendations, both at a core inspection level and within our annual reports and in the quality assurance feedback, is to drive improvements in those areas. What we do have is relevant interface meetings with HMPPS across different departments to help to understand what are the key deficits that we're finding in general in keeping people safe. That's not just related to serious further offences. So it can also relate to cases that are assessed as low, medium, high, very high risk of serious harm. Given the priority of the Chief Probation Officer, we know that there is some work being undertaken to exploring the training, learning and development offer that's in place and what will be provided in the future as well. But team, I think from our perspective, we're keen as well, aren't we, to share as much as we can in terms of the themes that are emerging. And I know that we do this through our annual report. But do you want to just say a little bit in terms of how much we do in terms of engaging with regions, engaging with reviewing managers to try and share the themes that are being identified by us?
Yeah, so we do have regular liaison with the regional SFO teams, and as was mentioned by Lindsay at the beginning, we undertake benchmarking sessions where we go and look at cases and look at reviews and what the themes are to come out of those. And as you've mentioned, Simi, we do have a focus in our annual reports about the key themes that are coming out of SFO reviews, and the assessment of risk of serious harm is a consistent one and has been also in the independent reviews as well. And we are looking at that, and we keep a process in place whereby we do log how many of the reviews that come to us do highlight an instance where there's been an inaccurate risk assessment or an incomplete risk assessment, for example, and we are looking at that information currently to see what we can glean from that and what we can share further. So there is a continuous dialogue with regions regarding what we're finding in SFO reviews, and we also, as part of the core inspection, do discuss SFO review findings with the regional SFO teams as well.
Fantastic, thank you. There's a few reflections. So we have someone, a researcher within the CJS, who has asked how they might be able to get involved or consideration to being involved. I think obviously a confidentiality issue would come in terms of being directly involved in the panels itself. But any thought in terms of how we might involve others that are not directly linked to the case, and if that would be appropriate to do so?
I think that sounds really interesting, and we're more than happy, as Hannah mentioned earlier, to have a conversation with colleagues who have ideas about how we can consider further issues. Was that the question that specifically mentioned neurodiversity, Simi, as well? Yeah. And that, of course, was a theme to come out of the Jordan McSweeney review, was the focus on his diverse needs. So that is something that's being progressed as part of the action plan from that independent review. But of course, there are often findings in relation to that in respect of other reviews. So we'd be more than happy to have a conversation to discuss how you think that you could assist us, and we, in this process, that would be really useful.
Thank you. And just with that theme, we've got a question from Richard Field, who's from the Learning Research Design faculty, who's currently involved in developing learning projects to support reviewing managers, and would be interested in understanding a bit more about the role of the reviewing manager in relation to the panels, and any kind of things that might be useful in terms of the product that they're developing to support with how they respond to learning, with this being a new approach.
That would be really, we're more than happy again to have a conversation. Was it Richard, did you say? Sorry, Richard. Yeah. That's and of course, as we've mentioned throughout this process, really does start with the SFO review. So there is a role for the review manager in this, and in the pilot in Wales, I believe, Hannah, the SFO review manager was the one who compiled like the key learning points from the SFO review for the panel. And in the discussions we've had more recently with regions about potentially progressing cases, the starting point has been with the SFO team to discuss that. So there absolutely is a role, and yes, we very much welcome that discussion.
Great, thank you. Communication with partner agencies. So I think we've done a fair bit to try and spread the word across probation delivery units, probation regions, and the national team. But what about our engagement with partner agencies?
Yeah, so we have already done some presentations with some of the MAPA coordinators in the probation service, in the hope that that message will be shared through those arenas, and we are considering other ways of reaching out to partnership agencies, perhaps through strategic level meetings, and as Hannah mentioned earlier, community safety partnerships, criminal justice boards, etc. We are willing to go and share this information in those arenas, and of course we welcome any contacts that people may have on this call to enable us to do that. We're more than happy to reach out to those as well.
Fantastic. Okay, so we have a question. I think this might relate to probation reset where a case has been suspended, but please do correct me if I've got this wrong. If there is an increase in issues regarding SFOs in cases that have had an early close due to falling below very high risk, which I'm assuming means has been suspended because they don't fit the category for continued contact, will this process pick up on this, any wider themes and not just local issues?
I think it's fair to say that we will only be progressing these panels on cases where there has been an SFO review, so it would depend on whether or not that case fell under that remit at that point. So it's kind of hard to answer that, because it would depend if the SFO was committed within a period which would still make it eligible for an SFO review to be completed. That said, if there were issues identified and the region felt there would be merit in us looking at it further, we would of course have that conversation, and we can certainly consider it further.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, I'm just looking at the questions that were in the chat, and I think we have answered the majority of them. So a message has just come in. A good way to build links would be to present at MAPA strategic management boards. Do get in touch if you'd like to come to Surrey and Sussex. That's going to be a definite yes, please. I think anything like that we warmly welcome, don't we, in terms of being able to spread the word wider and share the work that we're trying to promote. I think we did explore SMBs recently. Are we still looking at doing that area of work? Yeah.
Yes, and we have reached out to some colleagues that we've got in partnership agencies as well about how to promote. So that is still ongoing, and hopefully this will just be the start of us being able to do that.
Fantastic. Okay, I'll just wait and see if there's any other questions. Anyone wants to put their hand? Liz, I can see that you've just put your hand up, as I've said.
Thanks, Simi. Just a quick question. I don't know whether it came up in any of your pilots, but inevitably anything to do with SFOs, people start asking, can they see the report? And as you know, we do try to restrict access to the review itself to those that absolutely need to see it. And I wondered if it was anything that had come up through the pilot with partner agencies saying, oh, it might be helpful to see the review, and because I can see that maybe some prospective panel members may feel that would assist them.
Yeah, and I think we're conscious that the review itself was a probation document, a probation review, and that we wouldn't be looking to share it wider. Others do come in on this, but what we would want them to do is to look at their own agency records to build a profile of the context relevant to their agency. And the whole purpose of getting people together is so that we can then present the case to say, this is what each of the agencies know of each of that particular case, and then to generate that collaborative conversation about the case itself and where each agency was involved and what they could learn from each other. Lizzie, that's what we're expecting, aren't we? We're not looking to share.
No, it would be very much, Liz, a summary of the key points, really. Wouldn't be the review itself. And of course, the main focus of it would be the interaction with other agencies. So we wouldn't be expecting that every deficit that was highlighted in the review would be shared. It would be the key ones that were relevant for that forum, really, in terms of multi-agency learning.
Yeah, that's reassuring, because we know how much anxiety, you know, as well as I do, there is with staff around SFO reviews, and sort of another process to look over their work may, you know, not really be that helpful in the current climate. So that's reassuring. Thank you.
Absolutely. And also, as we said earlier, the focus very much is on that systemic and procedural learning. So whilst there will be some cases, of course, where there are individual bits that have come up from the SFO review, the main focus for this should be that systemic and you know, what is it what are the barriers to information sharing, for example, and what are the communication issues, and again, considering that and a more human factors approach in terms of why is it that things are happening as they are, and is there any barriers to that. So so not picking out individual elements that have been identified in the review, but looking more on a strategic and like I say, on a systemic level to identify that learning and what can be done to improve it in that particular area, I guess, and more widely where relevant.
Yeah, I think that'd be really helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz. That was really useful to raise. We have just got another mention from Kirsty in Wales about being invited to their SMB in Wales as well. So we definitely will be taking you up on that, Kirsty. A further question, I might have missed this, I do apologise if I missed this previously, but how do we prevent general findings in an annual report from just being bland, repetitious of what has been found before?
Does that specifically relate to the SFO annual report, or are we talking
I think we can include it in the SFO annual report, but also actions that come out of the learning panels. So if we're just making recommendations over and over again and we're repeating the same ones within the panel approach as well. I suppose, how are we going to assure that this is going to be effective? How are we ensuring that we're effective and having the right impact? And how are we driving our recommendations across HMPPS? And I can do a little bit further after that in terms of what we're doing for recommendations.
I think the key for that will be about the actions that we set and the timeframes and the way that we can measure whether actions have been impactful or not. And again, that will come very much from the participation and the ongoing learning that agencies take forward. But as we mentioned in the presentation, I think it's going to be key for us to set a review date for that. So as you say, actions aren't just raised and left, and people recognise that they need doing, but there's no follow-up on how they've been implemented and of course how impactful they've been. So that's going to be a really key part of it, is the follow-up, and measures of how we can look at whether something has worked or not will be a really big part of that as well, I would say.
Thank you. And I think there was reference to the Wales pilot as well, so the same person's referring to what happened after Wales as well. I think one of the things that we've acknowledged is that there's a lot of work to do in terms of following up recommendations, and at the moment in our core programme we do that when we return back to a PDU inspection to look at what progress has been made previously. But we do hold numerous interface meetings with HMPPS to explore the actions that have been taken, the progress that's been made. We are conscious that some of it cannot be made overnight, so whilst we are making recommendations, but what we are able to do is identify where there's been limited progress, and we do that through follow-up activity. We do that through continued QA activity or our core inspections where we're collating extra information and data. But I think what we need to say and identify as well is that there have been positive recommendations, progress made as well, particularly in the independent reviews where we've seen changes being made to assessment tools, to information gathering. A particular one that has been a long-standing area for improvement is to improve the mechanism by which probation areas receive and share information with police and children's services, particularly in relation to safeguarding and domestic abuse. Now, in the majority of areas, we've seen an improvement in that information sharing process. There's more to do in terms of how the information is handled and analysed and related to individual cases. But I think that shows that there are areas of evidence where progress is positively being made as well. Okay. We do have a follow-up point from somebody. So following on from Liz's point, if we are completing a timeline chronology of contact for all agencies, how will it be ensured that probation only learning identified in the SFO is not shared beyond those that don't need to know? So what is the timeline? Will that timeline only relate to where agency contact or issues were present? So I suppose it's that relevance of sharing information again.
And again, I think it's probably on the individual case. Is it crucial to what we're trying to achieve in the multi-agency learning panel or not? Is it a key finding that needs to be shared in that arena? And I think that would need to be ascertained on an individual case basis. But as I said, I think the key messages that we would need to focus on to share are those ones where there has been an interface with a partnership agency and when that perhaps hasn't been as effective and has had an impact on the management of the case. Those are the key bits in terms of it being a multi-agency forum, rather than just focusing on, as we said before, on individual practitioner or manager practice.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lucy. Okay. Now I can't see any further questions that I've missed. But there's a few that we've managed to answer in a few questions, but we have Diane who's coming in. Diane.
Hello, sorry, I'm not looking at the right screen. I'm a reviewing manager in the West Midlands SFO team, and I just wondered, you've explained that we would be compiling key points and key findings for the MALP. I just wondered if SFO review managers are expected to attend the actual MALP.
I think they did. Am I right, Hannah, in the Wales one? I think the review manager did attend.
He did, yeah, and I think it would be a valuable contribution to have you as part of that. But again, it would be part of that conversation in terms of setting up who needs to be involved, who can be around the table, and the contribution to be made. But yeah, the SFO review manager brings an awful lot of knowledge and understanding on this case. So it would be welcome to have you in attendance. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Diane.
Perfect. Okay. Any other questions, reflections from anyone, or any questions that I've missed that anyone wants to just flag and highlight again that we've not covered sufficiently?
I think we will as well, Simi, won't we, go through them all after just to check if there's anything, and we can compile some Q&A if necessary just to clarify any points.
Yeah, we have had Louise and Holly in the background that have been keeping an eye on the questions to make sure we've covered those. But we do have one from Tamsin, who has asked, how many MALPs are you anticipating will be completed?
Well, I think initially we'd like to be able to do one in every region. That's the initial starting point. But of course, it does depend on the cases and how many there are that are identified as suitable for this process. We do appreciate and fully acknowledge that there will be some work involved in setting this up, and obviously today's event has highlighted there are some other bits for us to consider, which is why we wanted to reach out and have this event to consider those in advance. So we're not underestimating the amount of time that may need to go into this, but equally we are very keen to progress this, and we would, as we said, like to get to compile a panel in each region, and then of course if there is more than one case and it's proving to be useful and the learning is relevant, we will look to expand that. So there's no sort of hard and fast answer really as to how many, but we would like to ensure that there is resource put into this by us in every region in due course.
And then again, we've got, please could you provide contact details following the meeting to enable further conversations. So I think Holly is going to be putting our contact details into the communication after this event to be able to share that further. We are really happy to have further conversations. I say that, I'm hoping the team agree as well. But yeah, no, we are really, really happy to receive further communications of anything that we can do to develop this process further. We think it's a real positive initiative to enable collaborative working across other agencies, to think about how we can improve multi-agency working. But also, I think it's really important to say that we really want to be able to highlight good and effective practice as well. If there's anything that you haven't been able to say today that you think would be relevant, we would, be very happy to pick that up. I've just noticed that we've got a hand up from Andrew. Andrew, did you want to come in?
I think I'd want to raise is beyond the immediate discussion. It's the wider point, and I feel concerned about how it all looks if I were still a practitioner, and how you introduce any kind of reviews. I'm not just talking about these, all of them. How do you get it in a way that people say, yes, I would like to learn from this experience, instead of everybody's out to get me? Yeah. And I can't help feeling that all reviews tend to implicitly say, we've been looking for perfection and you didn't deliver it. And the external world says probation has failed again because its own people have said you failed to achieve 100% perfection in this case. And the practitioner feels, if it doesn't matter what I do, they're going to say it wasn't good enough. So unless you have some way of making it clear that it is possible to achieve good enough when you're doing this kind of work, then reviews aren't going to work. And that's my fear about this, because of course what you're doing is, of course we should review and learn, but that's and it's not what you do, it's how what you do could be experienced by people, and is almost certainly always experienced, is almost certainly perceived by external people. It's always, not just probation, all the authorities failed again. How do you make a distinction with sometimes the work really wasn't good enough and you've got to be absolutely fearless in saying so, and sometimes you can say, well, look, there were one or two things that could have been done better, but actually overall they did all you could reasonably expect from a public service. And that I think is a very difficult line to tread and convey it to practitioners so that they come with you rather than experience of, oh right, they're just another group of people out to get me.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was my wider point. And I didn't come in earlier because I wanted to let you run your course today, but
that's really helpful.
That's still troubling me about all of this.
Yeah, and a really valuable and interesting reflection and question from Andrew on that one. I think one of the things that we are really keen to do is make sure that this is a strength-based approach. So we are not looking at kind of uncovering individual practice or things that may have been done differently by a particular individual. We can't stress enough that this is a wider systemic review of things that have happened or taken place where improvements could be made. But I think the key bit is as well that it's not just about making improvements, it's also about recognising positive and effective practice that will enable further learning or sharing across staff, across organisations in terms of things that can be learned from as well. I think one of the things that we need to reflect upon is that culture of what kind of environment is created and how the meetings are chaired, the tone of those meetings, and how we share some of this information with practitioners that might be worried about other people looking at their cases or what they've been involved in. So this is a start in terms of launching the events, but we want to be able to do more to share that as well. We are, for the first time in our annual reports, taking some comments and views from people that have been involved in serious further offences and reviewing managers as well, to understand their experience of going through those or being involved, to help us to understand that and to form an analysis that we will include in our annual report. I think something that's really been really kind of critical and something that I've been thinking about recently is our core inspection programme. So we know that when we announce an inspection, when we're about to go out, people are anxious about being involved in inspection. But we then send out a practitioner survey in terms of trying to get some feedback for our learning or our approach. And I think what really stands out, really positive, is how useful people have found the ability to have a reflective conversation about the case, where there is both constructive feedback and positive feedback in terms of things that were done well. So a balanced interview. And I can honestly say there's been no feedback that has been negative in terms of the process itself, in terms of being involved in inspection hasn't been useful for them. So I think we take some feedback from that in terms of those approaches and making sure that we take that further into all of the work that we do. I think it's important to recognise that there are struggles within the majority of public sector services at the moment. And as a result of that, it's important that as an independent organisation, we are open and honest about what we're finding, but driving improvement in the right way. So one of the things that we commonly do, or one of the things that we promote across the organisation, is that we inspect or that we do our work with dignity. So we are conscious about how things will land and how people will receive information. There's a lot of work that we do internally in terms of our approach, our training, assurance about how we engage with other people, and being sensitive to some of the information that we're sharing or what we're finding as well. So whilst we might have to share or identify difficult messages and difficult information, there's a right way and a wrong way of doing that. And I'm quite confident that we encourage ourselves to do that in the right way and take the feedback from others. But we are keen to learn. So if there are things that we don't do well, things that we can do differently, or things that can be done better to improve that learning culture, then we are very open to hearing and listening to that from other people as well. Okay. I'm just going to pick up on a final question from Deirdre. An approach adopted by criminal justice inspectors Northern Ireland when conducting inspections involved HMIP and local assessors in inspections. Local assessors were involved in Probation Board Northern Ireland area managers who were not directly involved in the case in which is this, sharing organisational issues. This collaborative approach helps to identify organisation and individual learning. Okay. So this was more of a collaborative approach where local assessors were used in some of the work that was being undertaken. That's really helpful, Deirdre. Thank you for sharing that. We do have an approach where, particularly in our youth justice programme, we have local assessors that we use regularly. We used to use local assessors in our core inspection programme as well, but we're very conscious in terms of the staffing situation within the service. And at the moment, we're using local assessors specifically in the Wales area, that Hannah has been helping us to develop further as well. A lot of our staff are seconded from the organisations as well. So what we do is make sure that we bring in relevant and recent practice and understanding of local issues to the work that we're undertaking. And obviously the SFO team have all got probation or youth justice background and experiences as well. So I think it's important that for future development, we are making sure that there is relevance within the teams itself as well. And we've got a suggestion of an article that can be used on about a good article on SFO reviews that's been posted from Yolo in the chat as well. Thank you, Yolo, for sharing that. We will definitely have a look and see how that might help us in terms of any future work that we are doing as well. Okay, so on that, I'm going to just draw the session to a close. If we do see any further questions or anything that we haven't been able to pick up, we will kind of answer those separately. As mentioned at the start, we will make sure that we provide a copy of the slides. The contact details have been entered as well. So if there's any further comments and reflections, please feel free to do get in touch with us. I can't thank you enough for attending and taking the time to join us today. I think we've got some really useful learning that we can take away. Hannah, Lizzie and Lindsay, anything from yourselves?
No, I don't think so. Just to say, if, as we've said all the way through, if anybody wants to get in touch and share any of the thoughts they've had during the session or discuss how we take this forward, then we're more than happy to receive that feedback and have those discussions. Thank you.
Fantastic. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day and thank you for taking time to be part of this. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.